Okay, cool. Thanks everyone for being here and thanks for bearing with us. We'll do group intros in a second, but I thought we'd start by introducing ourselves. So I'm Claire, and this is Augustine, and we both work at CUP. So CUP is the Center for Urban Pedagogy, but we prefer to go by CUP because it's easier. Our mission is to use the power of art and design to increase meaningful civic engagement. And we do this in partnership with marginalized communities. So what that means to us is that we work with people who are living, studying, or working in a particular community, and they're being impacted or affected by a specific policy, planning, or social justice issue. And we put them at the table with different visual thinkers and designers to explain that issue. We do this so that we can break down those complex policies and systems that are impacting these folks so they can understand how to change them and how to get involved and organize around them. One of CUP's programs is Envisioning Development. And through Envisioning Development, we explain key use in New York City. This is in the process of these different policies so they can organize for equitable development in their neighborhoods. So we've done a couple series through these. And so we have one about zoning, so what you can build in a specific area. And another one that explains ULURP, or the Uniform Land Use Review Process, and that explains a rezoning, so how to change what can actually be built in a place. And today, we'll talk about affordable housing. To give you a brief overview of the workshop, so we're going to explain affordable housing in a visual and interactive way for everyone here. So we'll look at what people mean when they say affordable. We'll talk about the different jobs and workers that fall across the income spectrum and who that is in the neighborhood. We'll talk about where residents of Bushwicks fall in this program and how much people pay for housing here. And then we'll also talk about how some of the programs that help people pay and afford to live here. And then at the end, we'll wrap it up by thinking about what a development or a new project might look like and evaluating that in this neighborhood. So I'll pass to Agustin.
Okay, great. So this workshop is going to assume an introductory level to affordable housing, but we understand that some of you may already know some things about affordable housing or may be more interested in learning how to conduct the workshop. But we're going to conduct today as if it's everyone's first time learning about this. So yeah, we'd love to hear your names, your pronouns, and what brought you here today, and also mention if you were at the zoning workshop last week, just so we can have a sense of that. So yeah, would anybody like to go first, please?
I'll go first. My name is Joanna Fuentes. And, yeah, that's it. Joanna Fuentes. Nice to meet you.
Okay, nice to meet you.
Hello, my name is Tashwana Wade. My pronoun is she, her. I was at the zoning workshop.
Oh, thanks for coming back.
My name is Camacho Robert. I'm the chair of the community board.
Celeste Elm, District Manager, CB4, also she, her, hers.
Sorry. I'm Cassandra Miller. She, her pronouns. I attended the weather zoning last week. How?
Hi, my name is Captain. I'm a new community board member since year 1-4. I used IB pronouns, and I was also in the meeting last week on zoning.
Great.
Hi, I'm Ben Tucker, he, him pronouns. I was also at the zoning workshop last week.
Fabulous. Well, nice to see so many familiar faces. Okay, well, we can jump right into it. I'm going to start with defining affordable housing. So this can feel like a loose concept because what is affordable for one person isn't necessarily affordable for another person. But the government actually does have a technical specific definition for it, and it has two parts to it. So the first part is the government says folks shouldn't spend more than 30% of their gross income on housing. Now that's gross income before taxes get taken out. So if you pay more than 30%, they think you're paying too much for housing. And so an easy way to visualize that on this spectrum is all of these incomes here across the top, that would be your gross housing, or sorry, your gross income. and the amount below it is how much you would be expected to pay for rent. So if you make $100,000 a year, 30% of that would be $2,500 a month. Now, obviously, a lot of us pay more. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, and when you say the government, you mean the federal government's definition, the city government's definition?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's the federal government. Yeah. So that's the first part of the definition. But then the question is 30% of what? Because 30% of my income might be different from 30% of this person's income. So what the government does in that case is they come up with a number that is a median amount for the area, for a specific area. And so what they'll do is, well, they'll define an area and then line up in a spreadsheet families from the least income all the way to the most income, and then they'll take the family in the middle, and that'll be the median family income. So it's not an average, it's just all the families lined up, and you take the one in the middle. And in New York City, it's 95,400. These are 2017 numbers. Yeah.
How were they able to determine the families in the middle?
So they know how much folks make.
Because what we are experiencing is that apartments, even though they may be under one lease, it will be several different people, and they're using all their incomes, and that does not mean that it's a family completely.
That's a good point, yeah. So what this is taking into consideration is an average family of 4. So for them, it's a family that's defined as not just they have to be connected by either blood or marriage, and it's considering 4 people, so like 2 adults and 2 kids is what they consider a family of 4. And so that's what the median family income is referring to. And you can take percentages of that to if it's 3 people. So 90% of that is actually the median family income for a family of 3, 80% for a family of 2, 70% for a family of 1. And it goes in the other direction too, but you add 8% for some reason. It's 108% is a family of 5, 116% is a family of 6. And so that's how that averages out.
I'm just touching my pearls.
So this median family income number is super important because all of the housing programs are based off of this number. What they say is 100% MFI is a family of 4 making that much amount. But they want to make housing programs are classified or they're based off of 30, 50, and 80% of this amount, which means that some housing programs will always refer to making housing affordable for folks who fall at the 80% of MFI, the 50% of MFI, or the 30% of MFI, meaning that this is what their annual income would be, and that housing ought to be affordable for folks in these making this much, meaning that a family making 30% MFI, or $28,600 per year, shouldn't be paying more than somewhere between just over $500 a month on housing. And same for 50% of MFI, they shouldn't be paying more than, somewhere between $1,000 and $1,500 a month.
When you walk over to take the bus,
Oh, okay, yeah, good idea, yeah. So yeah, the first question you always have to ask when folks say it's affordable is affordable for whom? Usually they're referring to folks in this 30, 50, 80% MFI, but there are even housing programs that will accommodate folks who make over 100% MFI. So yeah, we're gonna jump over to talking about jobs. And this is just a little exercise to start getting familiar with the income spectrum.
Sorry, quick question.
Yeah.
The 30, 50, 80% of the MFI of a specific
That's right.
A generalized notion of what that number looks like. So it takes into account the specific income in the area. Like if I were to build an affordable housing complex in one area, I would have to take into account what that 50 acres looks like there to determine what that rate would be.
Well, that's a great question because we are bound by the area of New York City.
Yeah.
And so that includes the 5 boroughs as well as
Putnam County up in Westchester. So
Putnam
I think,
County.
and so that also is what skews the medium income a little higher, because the idea is that by including another like county, it'll bring more people under that affordable housing radar, as opposed to like if it was just for like one borough where it might like cut a lot of people out of that.
They do that intentionally because New York is considered a unique market in which everything is inflated. And so by, by including Putnam County in the calculation, of course, the idea is more folks, and then counter argument to that is that you know, make it so that folks who are making much less than that,
Which might be a larger percentage than what's actually being reflected. Like that becomes a significantly larger amount of people that don't have access to affordable housing.
potentially, if there aren't affordable housing programs that cover that end of the spectrum.
So there are programs that cover below 30%.
Yeah,
There
all the way
are.
down to 0. Yeah.
But not that many, but there are.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and so we'll look at housing programs today that cover from 0 all the way up to about 120, or sorry, yeah, 120% MFI. Yeah. Okay, so this is just a fun activity just to get familiar with the spectrum. We have these little occupation patches, and could I just have a volunteer? All you're going to have to do is come up here, and these different patches say things like software engineer, security guard, teacher, and put them up on the spectrum more or less where you think they would fall for their income. Yeah, thank you. Okay. So which one do you have first there?
All right, so software engineer.
Okay, software engineer.
Okay, software engineer, I don't know why, but, to do it by each of them. So I think, I don't know, for some reason can I put it here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect.
And it should just stick.
And what do you have there?
Oh, this is, middle school teacher.
Okay, middle school teacher.
Well, I've seen bigger amounts than that. Auto mechanic.
Auto mechanic.
You know, they make money. Well, it depends where they at.
Yeah, exactly. Depends on the area.
You
Yeah,
know
just
what?
take your best guess for each of these.
All right, I'm gonna do this.
They don't get a lot of business.
Caseworker.
Caseworker, yeah. I get paid a little bit more.
All right, what do you got now? Real estate developer.
I would say. And then security guard.
Security guard.
All right, thank you so much for doing that.
It's probably all wrong.
I think you got a lot of them. You know, these are based on our numbers, but of course, you know, anybody in any field can make.
But did I get something?
You got a lot of them right. I think for middle school teacher, our numbers here say up to 60,000. I think. So I'll move that up.
Okay, and then for the caseworker, construction worker, we had around 58, 60,000. For the security guard, we had around 37,000.
And this is all before taxes, right?
Yeah.
Between, okay.
What's one in your hand?
Auto mechanic.
The auto mechanic is around 47,000. The real estate developer makes way more, so about $1 million.
Well, this would be off the chart here.
And then the software engineer is a little lower at like 130, but still pretty high up there.
Okay, yeah, in between, yeah.
Actually, we got a trade.
Okay, cool. So this is just to have an idea in our heads of who we're talking about when we see this spectrum. But now we're going to zoom in on Bushwick and take a look at where the residents of Bushwick fall on this income spectrum.
Okay, so right now we're going to spend some time building context around the neighborhood. I'll need a couple volunteers to come up here too, so I hope y'all are ready to move around a bit. So in this, we're going to basically be showing like a demographics, like income map of the neighborhood. And so I'll have each of you put up squares, like little felt squares, and each of the squares is going to represent 1,000 families in the neighborhood.
Okay, so I need 2 volunteers for this one. Okay, great. Yeah, please. Sorry? Yeah. Okay. So this is a chart that has all of the neighborhoods in the 5 boroughs, and for every neighborhood in the 5 boroughs, it has the number of families in every one of these income categories along the spectrum. And so for Bushwick, we're going to start with the very low income category. We have almost 9,000 families. It's 8,954. In the yellow, in the yellow. So if you could please put 9 squares above the yellow income category, perfect. Beautiful. Meanwhile, we could get started on the other end of the spectrum. In Bushwick, we have 827 families in the high income category. So we'll round that up to 1,000, so just 1 pink square. Beautiful. Okay, in the very low income category, we have 4,731 families, so we'll round that up to 5. So 5 red squares there. And in the middle income families, we have 2,462. So we'll round that down to 2, that's right. In the low income families, we have almost 5,000. It's 4,915, so we'll put 5 brown squares there. And then in the moderate family income, we have 3,366. So we'll put 3 blue squares there. All right. Thank y'all so much. Beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you. These are from the 2017 American Community Survey, 5-year estimates.
So this is like when they have the census or like call you and say, hey, fill out these things. So that's where this data is coming from.
And that's why it affects that. That's what's important.
Okay, so take a second to take a look at what's up on the board. So this is, like I said, a demographic income map of Bushwick. So taking a look at it, does this look right of what you think of the neighborhood? Is this like how you think about it?
In 2017, yes.
How would you say it's changed now?
Probably see more middle income and higher income families.
So more of the blue, green, and pink? And less of on this side, or the same amount?
It's actually on the high. I think it's on higher.
I think it's gross income is probably 60,000. Sometimes it's more like that. Sometimes, you know, the pandemic, somebody lost their job. I think right now it might be.
So you're saying there's more people on this side?
A lot of people lost their jobs
Yeah.
or quit. Everybody's quit.
I'm also thinking, like, even with the income, like, the influx of people putting money, like, with business owners being supported, that doesn't necessarily mean that they live in Bushwick. So that's another thing to take into account, that they might be earning money. I mean, people might have opened a club or opened a particular venue that have allowed them to fall within the higher end of these categories, but they don't necessarily reside.
Yeah, that's a great point.
So COVID actually put a lot of money in people's pockets. And that's probably people that actually don't live in the community.
So like we talked about, so the MFI of New York City is 95,400. So what do you think the median family income is in this neighborhood?
50?
Do I have it?
Yeah, it's in the.
Sorry.
Say 70, 67.
We've got 42,365 here.
So even though affordable housing is based on this MFI, it's clear that, you know, what's affordable to New York City isn't affordable for this neighborhood and a bunch of other neighborhoods. And so that's why we bring this up, and a lot of you have brought it up too, right? Like the median family income is way too high for what's around here. And so this is an opportunity to, you know, report and say this is too high, this doesn't make sense for us, to fight against developers that are saying, oh, we're trying to target the 100% and realize that 100% doesn't actually make sense for here. We actually need 20%, 30%. Yes.
And I guess that's the reason why a lot of these developers are able to do these homes in our areas, because it kind of sounds good. You say low income, but it's low income that's going to benefit someone else.
Right. Because when you go on New York City Housing Connect, there is no affordable housing. Everything is ranging from 80 to 80 up when it comes to really nice looking apartments. All the cheaper apartments is all in the Bronx. And that's what I'm noticing. The Bronx, you go ahead and apply. You run into the yellow and the red. But when you're looking at Bushwick, you're looking at Bed-Stuy, you're looking at anything even in Brooklyn at this time, you're looking in the blue and the green. And a little bit of the red and the a little bit, but more focusing on the blue.
Yeah, and even though they might say it's low income, right? That's still like just a little under 80,000, which is a lot for a family. Were you gonna add something?
Something very similar to that, that in the Housing Connect apartments, or even I've seen some of the newer buildings that have gone up near my building, they'll advertise affordable housing, however, it's like 80% MFI, and so it's something like expecting like an income of $80,000 to $85,000 in basic rent on that, and it's still, you know, upwards of $2,000 plus, and so that's really not very affordable at all.
Right.
My question is, how is that, how do they see that as people that live in the community that can't afford that? So they're not building for us. You know, they're building to fill their pockets up and to get whatever cost based on the square footage that their apartments they have. Because everything's got to be based on square footage, because, you know, they're building a 1 and 2 bedroom where Latinos and blacks coming in here with kids and, you know, and rooms. The more the square footage you got, the more rent you can pay. So it's
Yeah, and then they can charge like 25 plus for a 1 bedroom. Then we can't look into that at all.
Exactly.
Yeah, a lot of developers are, you know, building for the future, right? Who they think will come here, but they're not building for now and like what people see around them.
I think that leads us to the next activity, which is to put some numbers on what housing in this neighborhood costs. And y'all have already been talking about this, but we have some patches so that we can visualize it up here. So could I have another volunteer come up to put these up? Yeah, please. Thank you. and we're going to need the crowd support for this one. But basically, if you could show these up. So we have these 3 little patches, and they have a 1, a 2, and a 3 on them to indicate a 1-bedroom, a 2-bedroom, and a 3-bedroom apartment. And what we want to do is put them up here to show what a 1-bedroom apartment would cost in Bushwick, what a 2-bedroom apartment would cost in Bushwick, what a 3-bedroom, just average, what you think the average is. So what about 1-bedroom apartment in Bushwick? What's the average price per month?
Right there.
Okay, so they're saying around 2,000.
2-bedroom is about 3,000.
I would say 5,000.
35?
Three two-bedroom?
Okay, so 2-bedroom, like a 3-2.
And now the 3, you might as well throw it over.
4,000.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Now they give you a break if you come with no kids.
especially now that they fix up the apartments and they put in like the marble and the stone and all these new accessories that's in the apartment. Ooh,
And not even that, to be honest with you, 2,500 is an old apartment where I live now. 2,500 for a 2-bedroom apartment. Because it's Bushwick's been charging us. But I used to pay $645, but the landlord raised it up to 2,000.
From 645 to 2,500.
And everyone now is talking too, right, about all the rents getting raised because of the rent guidelines for it. Like all of that is happening.
So yeah, so you know what? Here we have the prices of a 1, 2, and 3-bedroom family home, and then here we have on top the income distribution for this area.
Is it right?
Are these prices right?
Yeah. No, other 2 and 3 is based on 2 and 3, are they right or?
You know, we just looked up quickly on Craigslist and saw the numbers we scrolled through are a little bit less than this.
But if you're seeing these numbers, like we
But you're the
totally
expert
trust you
here.
that those are the numbers.
Yeah, Crest is a little bit low, but it's not nobody go to Craigslist no more. Street easy.
Street Easy, Zillow,
Yeah.
Julia. I've been looking in for a 2-bedroom apartment, and I've been looking at 3,000, 2,500. That's the lowest, 2,500. You may get something 2,000. It's such a small bed box.
Four apartments available for 2,500.
My question is, do people make that kind of money for that 1 bedroom?
Sorry?
Do people make that kind of money for that 1 bedroom?
Yeah. Do you mean do people actually charge that much for a 1-bedroom apartment?
No. Do people make?
You know, if the software engineers that we talked about, the real estate developers are definitely making that. I think if you are a 2-income household, right, like if one person makes 60, another person makes 80, you're able to hit that. But I think, you know, in most
But one person by himself for that 1 bedroom won't.
Yeah.
Only if they have a high-paying job.
Right.
Only if they're the software engineer or the real estate developer.
Or it's a couple that settles on one bedroom.
Yeah, and some people mentioned too, right? It could be like multiple families living in that one, so it's like an intergenerational kind of situation.
Exactly. So a family of 4 would probably want at least a 2-bedroom apartment.
So you give this workshop to the developers?
Yeah. So yeah, if a family of 4 would want at least a 2-bedroom apartment, and this is where a 2-bedroom apartment is landing, it means that all of the population to this side can't afford to live in this neighborhood. But obviously they do live in this neighborhood. And so,
Yeah, how are they making it
so how
work?
are they making it work?
They get in programs.
That's a big one.
They get evicted and being saved by ERAC or city facts. That could be.
But those programs are only temporary.
No, it depends.
Uh-oh.
City facts you can give to new loans. You have an active public assistance piece. ERAC is a 1-year situation where they pay your rent for 1 year and then maybe 3 future months. But after that, your landlord cannot evict you for 1 year.
Right.
Then you back to square one.
Yeah, and people who have like the FEP soda vouchers, like there's their own problems, right? They're getting discriminated against. They're not having enough housing for that. But yeah, that's definitely one way that people are living in this neighborhood. Can people think of any other ideas? We've mentioned some of them too.
Well, they're just paying a significant percentage of what they're not falling within the confines of what the federal government defines as the percentage you should be spending on housing.
That's right.
Spending a significant percentage above that.
Right, right, that's right. They're house poor. They're paying way more than 30% of their income.
Roommates.
Yeah, roommates.
Crowding together, yep.
Airbnb.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry. This is true.
Yep. So yeah, there's a lot of reasons. There's a lot of ways that people make it work, despite the fact that the housing is way too expensive. So yeah, now we're going to talk about 4 housing programs that we identified. Am I missing a piece?
No, no, no.
Okay. 4 housing programs that we identified to talk to y'all about today. These are not by any means all of them, and we can come back and talk about other ones at a different time. But we're going to focus on some programs called ELA, SARA, Voluntary Inclusionary Housing, and something called Low Income Housing Tax Credit.
Do you have a question?
Quick question.
Yeah.
If I may ask. So, is there any data on the percentage by which people in certain areas pay above that 30% point? Like, I'm curious, when we see these numbers here, what we're noticing is that there's a significant number of residents in Bushwick who pay way above that 30% threshold. And what is the New York is inherently, New York City is super expensive. I would assume that in other districts that's also happening, right? These are other. Is there a way of getting a sense of, is this happening? Is this a problem that is so unique? Like, in what sense is Bushwick being affected by this particular issue in comparison to where other neighborhoods are also might be affected by this situation? I'm curious if those numbers are available, whether with y'all or if there's one to look into.
That's a great question. I am sure those numbers exist, but we don't have them here with us, and I wouldn't know where exactly to point you to. But a lot of folks study this, and that would be available, yeah.
Cool. So I'll get into it. I think just sort of like a context of sort of affordable housing programs. So some of the programs that people are maybe more familiar with, like public housing or Section 8, those kind of programs are really targeted to that bottom level, right? The like people who are in less than 20, people who are in less than 40,000. And so those programs were created like around the 60s and the 70s. I mean, all of those programs are funded by the federal government. So, you know, I think people may know now, right? It's really hard to get on those lists. Section 8, that's like an 8-year waiting list. Public housing, basically closed.
Section 8 is on a freeze. It's not happening. Also, if you're on the wait list, then you're okay. They recently had a opening last year where you was able to do a lottery wait list. And if you got pulled, then you joined a regular wait list. But right now it's on a freeze. Nobody can apply. In this state.
Yeah, great point. Like, it's super hard for families who make very low incomes to get into any of these affordable housing programs. There's been a shift in how affordable housing programs are funded, right? So the beginning programs, they were funded by the federal government. The federal government realized this is too expensive, and they didn't want to do it anymore. So now a lot of the affordable housing programs have been pushed into developers, so that the developers are the ones taking on the cost and taking on the initial money, and then they'll just make it up later. And so you'll notice that there's a shift between like actually getting affordable housing to folks and, you know, just preparing for a future, starting to reach those like 100%, 80% kind of incomes.
We're gonna get into it.
You just said something real interesting. So basically it's falling onto the developers.
No.
So it's kind of like creating a loophole for them.
Yeah, so they get like tax incentives, tax breaks if they are, you know, committing to do like 20 units or 20%. But like public housing, Section 8, those are like 100% kind of buildings. And so now they're sort of just getting a tax cut or like a piece to make up for that.
Some of them federal programs are only like 30 years or 25 years.
Yeah, so a lot of,
So a lot of old timers that were having it either no longer in the program or passed away and no longer like that. So depreciate during time after a while. Federal government don't want to be landlord anymore, just like NYCHA.
Yeah, so like NYCHA, you brought up, right, they're figuring out what to do with their like buildings and all the problems that in there, and so they're also trying to figure that out too, and are trying to bring developers in there.
NYCHA made an excuse because they're federal fund, they can't take money out of their own land. So what they did was they gave it to RFP to developers. Now since it's a private entity, they could take money from the equity of the land to build in itself and get a percentage out of that. I heard it's almost 10%. They're making a lot of money.
Wow.
Okay, so we'll get into one program now. So the first one we're going to talk about is called ELA, and ELA stands for Extremely Low and Low Income Affordability.
Yep.
Okay, so how this program works is sort of what we talked about. So developers get low-cost loans in exchange for making affordable housing. This program is actually a lot better than some of the other programs. So at least 80% of the buildings that these developers are making have to be affordable. And so even within that, so they have to be affordable to at least 80% of MFI. So, you know, around like 65, 70,000 and under, 80% of the units have to go to people who make that much. And within that 80%, it has to go to people who make 30%, 40%, 50%. So hitting all the different levels. And in ELA programs or ELA buildings, 15% of the units also have to go to formerly homeless families. So this program, in comparison to other like luxury high-rise developments, is trying to do more to target that. And usually the developers who make these are like nonprofit developers or like community organizations trying to actually help the people in the neighborhood. To get these units, it's a lottery. So some of you have mentioned Housing Connect, and that's the only way to get these buildings. So if you go to Housing Connect, you'll be able to search an ELA building and try to apply for it there. Right now in the city, it's a fairly new program. I think it started under de Blasio. So there's about 6,000-ish units, and it's growing each year as more buildings are built. And people, at least in the housing policy world, see this as like a really good way to create more affordable units than, say, other development programs there are. Okay, so the next program we'll talk about is SARA. And so SARA stands for the Senior Affordable Rental Apartments, and this is particularly targeted to like the older people in our communities. So it's the same deal in that low-cost loans are going to developers, but these units can only go to low-income seniors over 62 years old. So as opposed to the other program where it's like 80% have to go to a certain income range, this whole building is targeted to seniors who make no more than 60%. So they can't make more than that like $75,000, $80,000.
Collectively, so it's two senior, they are married, and both of them receive a pension at SSI. It goes over 60, they can't qualify.
Yeah, so it has to be like under that, otherwise they get priced out. There are some buildings where there are other like requirements in place. So if it's like, oh, we have money from SARA and also money from another program, they could have seniors who are older or like who make more than that, but for the most part, generally you have to make under that much money. And then in this kind of program, 30% of the units have to be set aside for formerly homeless people. It's the same thing as ELA, so you have to do the Housing Connect lottery to get it. And so there's about 4,000 to 5,000 units that are being used under this program, and there's more to come. I think the city has even said like there are a lot of units in SARA that people don't know about or that they know they can qualify for. There might not be enough units to house them, but I think people don't necessarily know that this program exists yet.
With Ella and Sarah, if someone's homeless, do they still go through the lottery?
I'm not sure. I know that like they might have their caseworker help or have some of those vouchers to help them get in here, but I'm not sure like if there's like a priority kind of thing.
So I believe the answer for that. So when you are homeless, you go into the DHS system. There they will give you a housing manager. That housing manager will work with you within the first 60 days to open up a public assistance case and see whether you work or not. depending on, unfortunately from what I've been told, depending on your pressure on your housing managers, how you get to your apartments. If you're very relaxed into where your situation, sometimes people stay into shelter for 3-4 years.
I got that part, it's just the part with developers and the programs where is there like a priority? Because now, let's say for instance, they're homeless, they have the shelter, they have the management. Now, let's say for instance, the manager, the social worker calls and say, hey, I have someone that can move into this apartment. Is there a way that I can get it? Is there a priority? That's you know, yeah. Because I mean, that's what makes a difference.
Yeah, I think the developer's only responsible to like hold them, but actually fill them. I don't know if anyone's holding them accountable. Like you need to do it by the state, or like we need to have a direct path.
We can ask for more information on that too.
Yeah.
I wonder
Thanks.
about the senior program. So in the sense of like, if you're say you're a senior, but you live in with a family, with the other members of your family, and you're provided this housing because you now turn 62, you're a caretaker. But like, in what way can someone carry over? Can someone carry over other members of their family into this housing system?
I think it works how, let's say you're the senior, but you're you're the people are dependent on you. I think you can carry them over, but like if you had an adult child who then started taking the job, I think there would be like they might have to move out, or you would have to figure out how to work that.
But hypothetically, they could bring in family members.
I think so.
Okay.
Okay, you want to do the other two?
Yeah.
I'll put them up.
So the other two programs that we're going to talk about are different in that they address developers. So this is where the government, either the federal government or the city government, is making it attractive to developers to include affordable housing in the new buildings that they work on or that they build. So the first one we're going to talk about is low-income housing tax credit. And it goes by the initials, and you can just say LIHTC. So the way this works is that the federal government will give tax credit vouchers to local housing agencies, and then private developers can apply to receive those tax credits by presenting plans for buildings that they're going to build, and those plans are scored on a point system. And the way they might win one is by how much affordable housing they provide in their plan. And so under the basic formula, they either have to make 20% of the units affordable for families at 50% of MFI, or 40% of the units affordable for families at 60% of MFI. So to look at it on the chart, it would either have to be it would either have to be 20% of the units in the new building have to be affordable for folks at 50% of MFI, so anybody on this side of the spectrum, or they can include more units, up to 40%, that are affordable for families at 60% of MFI. Something that they're also allowed to do is something called income averaging, which means that they'll say, 40% of your building has to be affordable for families at 60% MFI. But the developers will say, well, what if I do one that's affordable for 80% MFI and then two that are affordable at 50% MFI, and those will average out to 60% MFI. That's allowed. But what we still don't know or have data on is if developers take the time to actually figure that out, or if they'll just do them all at 60% MFI, for instance. We just don't have the information about that yet. So in order to get into one of these units, it's through a lottery. That's something you have to apply for. And right now there are 170,000 affordable housing units in New York City created through this program. The one downside is that the developers usually only have to keep their units affordable for 30 years, which means that after 30 years, they no longer have to rent those units for those affordable amounts, which means that it expires, and so it's a temporary fix.
How might developers discourage people from applying? I'm just curious, like, if that's ever used as a way to, like, not have to then allow to not then have to use that apartment as affordable housing. Discouraging.
Well, the apartment has to be affordable, so the developer has to rent it at that amount. And in order to qualify for that housing, you would have to demonstrate that you'd have to be on this list and be awarded it. Yeah.
I feel like before too, though, there were those stories of like buildings where had like a poor door and like rich and like, you know, regular price stores or even like different quality apartments, and like those could all like, I don't know if that's still happening, but definitely like 5-10 years ago, that was definitely one way they were getting discouraged.
So basically, after 30 years, they're not under the contract now to rent that as a low income. So now they start becoming like just regular. Okay.
Yeah.
Another thing is that, so that's maybe, I don't know if you get where I'm coming from. How is it that these developers, who makes a decision and what areas they come to? And what could be built in that community?
So like where they go and what's built?
Yeah.
So, well, what's built is determined by what we learned a little bit about last week with the zoning, the FAR, right? So if they have zoning that allows them to build a bigger building or to build a certain size of building, they may try to maximize the most that they can get out of that lot, right? Because that needs more money. You know, where is largely determined by, you know, what used to be determined by available land, but we now know that most developers are going to demolish properties and then try to build. So theoretically anywhere. It doesn't necessarily mean a vacant lot, but it could mean a vacant lot.
So this is basically good for us to educate ourselves so we know, okay, we have something big here. Thank you.
Well, that's actually a perfect segue into the next one, voluntary inclusionary housing, because one thing that came up last week was this question is, if we have a certain zoning in Bushwick, how are developers coming in and building these giant buildings? And one of the ways that the city makes it attractive for developers to build in an area is by allowing them to go bigger if they include affordable housing in their units. So
I think also something to note, right? Like these programs, we're all putting them in the brown, but because they're arrows, they theoretically are going all the way to the end, right? Because they can decide how to average it out. More often than not, it's just staying in the brown.
Right. So the way voluntary inclusionary housing works is that when developers apply to create a building, they get the option. You can build up to 33% bigger, so you get a size bonus, if you set aside 20% of the units for families at or below 80% of MFI. And then in some special districts, it can even be up to 125 or 175% MFI, which you might say, that's no longer affordable housing, that's just regular market rate housing. Which is wild that it can even go, that they have to qualify that, because that's how high the free market rent can go sometimes. But it feels absurd, yeah, I agree with this. So yeah, under the basic formula, renters living in the affordable portion of a voluntary inclusionary housing building, which again would only be 20% of that building, it would be affordable for families making up to 80% of MFI. So that's a family of four making $76,300. The good thing about this one is that it is permanent. So these units in these buildings will always be affordable. So those won't go away. The thing about this one is that a lot of developers, this program is still active, but many developers are just choosing not to take it. They choose not to. They don't think it's financially viable or not worth the extra trouble. And so something we can talk about later is a new program called mandatory inclusionary housing, which is a way to make it so that developers have to include affordable housing in their new developments.
Inclusionary housing, because this one is voluntary. Question?
Yeah, question. How many affordable units have been built by AIH?
Yeah, there are about 8,400 that were built during the de Blasio administration.
So the next part of this is we could look at a specific building, but did anyone else have any other questions they want about these programs or?
Yeah, just kind of a follow-up. So under these 4 programs you mentioned, I tallied up about 190,000 units total built, and so these 4 programs, is that the amount of units that have built like from 2014 to 2017, or is that just some total since they've been enacted? And then my follow-up question is, that's a really small number relative to like 5 million apartments in New York City, or maybe like 3.5 to 5 million, I don't know the exact numbers. But essentially, getting into what you're saying about mandatory, what are the tools which the government would use to try to bump these numbers up? Because only Sarah built a significant number of apartments. Was it Sarah that had 170,000, or was LA? Tech?
Yeah, Ella and Sarah are like under 10,000 each. Yeah.
Yeah, and it seems like they're not as enticing to developers. So is Tech just really enticing to them? That's why they're jumping at it?
So I think with LIHTC, they stand to save millions of dollars if they get it, because that's how high the taxes are. And so it is really attractive because of all the money that they can save. So it's worth it to them to go through the trouble of making these convincing applications. I think with voluntary inclusionary housing, because there's not that guarantee, and also because in New York the free market rate is so high, that they'll run the numbers and find that they don't stand much to gain by increasing the building size and then having to rent these apartments for perpetuity at affordable rates, because they could stand more to gain if everything went with the market. And then to your other question about the number of housing, that's a great point. So our numbers are not consistent. Some of them are units that were created during the de Blasio administration, and then others are however many exist since the program started. So I don't have an answer for that question. But regarding the mandatory inclusionary housing, that one's pretty complex, and it's like a separate 30-minute part, but it basically gets triggered when the zoning for an area changes, and at that point developers are able to build bigger, so that's how it's similar, but then they have to choose between one of 4 options for including housing, and they're all very similar to this, in which it's like X% of your building has to be affordable to this many, and X% of your building has to be affordable to this many. It's just slightly different amounts, and it ranges all the way up to middle income.
You also brought up a great point about like the numbers aspect, and I think, right, you're talking about 5 million apartments, and under rent stabilization alone as a program, that's almost 1 million apartments, and that's why, housing advocates and other people are fighting so hard to keep rent stabilized apartments there instead of, turning them over and making them market rate, just because realistically that's like how the most people are getting housed too.
Yeah, but if you see how they are taking advantage out of the system by creating these figure buildings and add on by saying that they're giving us apartments. So they're creating the solution that, okay, if I get X amount of square footage, then I can apply for this program. You know what I'm saying? And we only get X amount because we allow them to get X amount because they're giving us what they call affordable, when basically it's not affordable. But some of the crunch, I would like to see, I would like to see the numbers crunch in regards to a new, a 2-family home converted into a 6-family home. With that down, what is the cost and how is the savings and what is it in their pocket that? Because, new building, I know the taxes and insurance are high because it's a new building. And that's why they have a lot of investors to pay into there. So I just don't know how the numbers in regards to a new building compared to them building that, or what is their numbers? I would like to just see what is it that benefits, because they're coming like hotcakes. So it's got to be making money. Somebody's got to be making money, because they weren't doing it if it does not cost them money. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So the numbers, we're crunching numbers here on the affordability. I would like to know the cost to them at the high end, and see what is it that really, for you can put these people on the spot and say, guess what? I know what it costs you. I know the numbers. I know you can do this, because they always come with excuse. Well, I crunch numbers. Everything is about numbers when they come to the board. The numbers are already crunched. They already have a set figure how much money they're gonna make, how long they're gonna pay it back, and continue keeping that home to invest and keep making money.
Yeah, that's a great point.
I think to add to Camacho is basically, we have these developers that commit, and yes, there may be a vacant lot, or I can understand a vacant lot and we may need some properties there, but my thing is more like when they're coming in now, they're taking a 6-family house, or maybe a couple of 6-family houses from the block, and now, you know, just breaking them down just to build this affordable housing. And you know what, Camacho, I think it's because we didn't know, and I think that being educated, I think that now that we know, it's gonna be different for us going in. I think that this is helping us to know how to be able to approach the developers, and now know how to approach them moving forward. I think that's.
Yeah, because I think there's a piece, right? Like you could go to a developer meeting and be like, hey, you're not making enough affordable housing, and they'll take that, but they won't like be like, well, we have 20, that's enough, right? But if you can say, I know this is the median income here, we deserve this many, then you have a little more to bargain and leverage with than just saying, oh, they said they were making affordable housing, I guess it's affordable.
Right, because now when you crunch the numbers in front of them, now they're like, wait a minute, they know what they're talking about. So CB4 is going to be a force to be reckoned with. I just had to throw that in.
It's saying, okay, what is your end of the deal, and what is it that you're making that you're saying is not, that you're not making? So what? You lose 2 or 3, but you gain people and you gain people. You know, if it's about the money, then you're in the wrong place. You know what I'm saying? Because one, we don't have it, and only picky people, just like you say, that can afford to live here and increase our property value that we've been here for so long. Our seniors and our 2 or 3 family homes are having a hard time now because of that. And their property values are going up, and their taxes are going up, and their insurance, because the property value went up. Because if like in my home, I paid my home, and this is how much it cost me. Now all of a sudden in order for me to build the new one, if I get burned down or get out, it's gonna cost me triple what I paid. Now I'm gonna say, well, I'm gonna sell and get whatever I could get, because I can't afford to build the house. And those are things that we have to make sure the 2 and 3 family homes, that we preserve the community, because that's what made the community what it is, not these high rises. This is not Manhattan. And now Manhattan is getting all empty because nobody wants to go back to the offices, and they're going to try to get put them into shelters. I was hearing, and put hotels into shelters, brand new hotels, that people not going in there. So I don't know how is that benefiting the community. How can we work so we can have the key players when they're sitting at the table and saying, well, we want to do this, and this is what we already know the numbers, and crunch the numbers, and we can say, well, you got to make affordable according to the people that live here, not the people that you want to live here.
I think it's fighting more for mandates, making them not a decision that they make, it's a decision that we, the community, we, the people.
And so then, just a few other things I'll add. Some things to keep in mind is the percentage of renters versus homeowners and how that may affect a certain character in the neighborhood, right? If you have a lot of renters, they're beholden to whoever owns the property. So if there are people from the community that know the community, maybe there's more of an incentive for them to rent at reasonable rates versus people who are coming in to exploit the demand on the housing market. There's also, when we hear the numbers don't work, you can think about it from the perspective of, yes, the numbers don't work because I won't make a profit, but also from the maintenance perspective. So if you have the same income and you're not making enough to maintain your building, there's no sustainability there, and you may end up with another night job, unintentionally. And then also thinking about the different professions that we went through in the very beginning, we don't just have, we may have a lot in a certain category, but how can you balance out the need with the higher levels of income to make sure we're averaging out and having like successful, sustainable housing? Those are the conversations we don't really get into, but those are the ones where we can say, hey, listen, we understand how it works. How can we make this, how can we make the numbers work, right? How can we balance it out? And what programs are you thinking about using?
So let's say, I'm sorry, so let's just make a little light bulb go up. Now, also holding them that they bring work, employment to the community, because employment would be like, we would hire people from the community, so that will build up the community and the people in the community as well.
That's what mentioned is
That will,
they will hire
absolutely, like that should, right, there should be a percentage of our community people also benefiting from the stuff that's happening in our community.
But these developers they're coming in, and they're not, back then we had supers and assistant supers, they had an apartment back then, so what they're doing is they're getting this company or a couple of crew
Right.
with the same water, mopping the same buildings, and I see them all the time, and they're not bringing jobs to this community.
I think holding them accountable and speaking and being that voice and advocating for our community.
And the council members, I mean, developers have to come in, they assess the situation, but they don't only go in front of the community.
Absolutely.
And developers can bring in like other jobs that aren't just supers, right? Like you could create a deal like, okay, you're bringing this many people, you need to bring a supermarket, and how can you get people from the neighborhood to be, the ones employed there, like different stores or, coffee shops, whatever it is they're bringing into.
Is there a mandate that the city has on like how you develop? Like, I'm just thinking that we're talking about having the community invest within itself, and I think it incentivizes local. Like, is there a way that local developers have specific incentives in getting engaged in developing within the confines of their community, whether those programs are widely available, encouraged? I mean, how aware are?
Yeah, I think so. Like Ella and Sarah, those are sort of meant for these like local sort of developers to come in. So, there are nonprofit developers, or like I think the Department of Housing Preservation and Development, I think there's about 1,000 of these like local developers that make these buildings for the communities. I think so there are specific programs targeted to those, but I think a majority of the programs are sort of these big developers that come in, build all around the country, and just try to make money off of them.
I just think those more often than not, right, have very little understanding of the community in which they're building in and the needs of that community. And I think there's something to be said for, I don't know, our responsibility as our community to really make sure that this information is spread widely available to the local developers play a part in the future of what apartments and housing is in the community.
And another distinction there, when we think about nonprofit housing developers, we often think about city-owned land. They're the ones that are going to be applying right to RFPs for city-owned projects. And then you also have private land, which is really different. Most of the time, when there's something on private land, it's not going to come before the board, especially if they have has a right zoning, so meaning they have the right to build within their zoning that exists. Unless they want to change the zoning, and then that's what would trigger the whole ULER process, which is another thing. No, we haven't done it yet. But yeah, and that's how the board would be able to, that's probably one of the top two of the board's charter mandated responsibilities, weighing in on those applications, because they're generally much larger projects. So not just one building, but a series of blocks that would maybe change the zoning and provide certain amounts of units.
But so it's only, my thing is, like you said, it as of right, is there any way that us can change the mandate of the city charter in regards to as of right to be the same way as the city owned land to accommodate the community at large? Or you know what I'm saying?
So, and I don't want to introduce too many technical terms, but I think that most community boards prior to the de Blasio administration, they pursued rezonings to make sure that they had contextual zoning, meaning that they wouldn't see some of the things we're seeing in Bushwick right now. So making sure that there were areas where they wanted to see targeted growth. So Broadway is a great example, right? When Bed-Stuy rezoned, they said we have these beautiful, brownstones. We don't want to see people demolish them and build monstrosities. We want to control where they build. And so when they rezoned, they were able to target those larger corridors for the higher density development. Some of those buildings you're seeing in Bed-Stuy now Other districts were able to do the same thing. Most communities, I would say, and I'd have to get data on this, did rezone prior to de Blasio, but there were a few of them that went through it in a comprehensive way that ultimately became controversial because the zoning changed, but there was no guarantee that the vision for what was being said might come to the zoning would actually be in the zoning.
Was East New York part of that zone?
They were the first one. They were successfully rezoned, but just because you're rezoned doesn't mean that one development is going to happen like that. Because remember, the market wasn't where it was at when they were rezoned, and the market's probably still not there where you're seeing a lot of aggressive development, but probably more so recently they're seeing more people coming in, but not back in, 2015? When it was originally rezoned. So Bushwick was in more of a position to be redeveloped than East New York at the time.
And East New York is like that mandatory inclusionary housing program, like a lot of the first developments are like cited for East New York. It was sort of like the test neighborhood for what these could look like in the future. Cool. So unless anyone has questions, I think Celeste send us a couple buildings, so we'll just try to cite them on this map so you can sort of see the affordability of them. So just give us a second. Yeah, I think take down these. Well, because we're going to change the numbers.
Oh, we are.
Yeah, just because of like what they have.
Oh, okay. Sure.
So it's, yeah, take down the blue green. And then change. I think it was a better. Okay, so one building we're going to talk about is Linden Grove. So this is at 233 Linden. And so this development, I think, is settled to like be done at the end of this year or early next year. So this project is going to create 153 units. So we're going to take these squares and count them. I think I think we'll take the like circles and count them as 10. It's just because it's a smaller number.
Okay, so each circle is 10 units?
Mm-hmm. So of the 153, there's going to be 60 targeted for families making 40% AMI. So
6 circles over here at 60?
Yeah, so around the 40,000 range. There's a mix, so it's like studios, 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms. I think the breakdown was more to the 2 bedroom side, but so there's a couple within each. And then there's about 50 units targeted for formerly homeless folks.
So 5 in the yellow?
Yeah. And then an additional like 40-ish units targeted for people making 30% AMI. So I would add 4 more to the yellow too.
Okay, we're going to introduce the big circle, which counts as 50. Oops. I can just take this one.
Yeah. Okay, so looking at the circles, this is what that new building is going to bring. This building also brings in some supportive services. So I think this building was created under Sarah, so targeted towards senior families. And so there's going to be like health and wellness programs, how to stay, in place in your home, those kind of supportive services brought in by like other community organizations too. So I think, what do you guys think about this proposed building? How does that fit into this neighborhood?
The distribution actually pretty much matches the income of the neighborhood, just for the affordable units.
Yeah.
Was it 100% affordable, this building? Or no?
I think it is 100%.
So this one was 100% affordable.
We'll also go through another development that isn't as good as this, but yeah. What are just taking your thoughts on this one so far?
I think it needs to be inclusive, and that like it's also not only the needs of people who have like financial needs, but also
Yeah, I think this is a pretty good example of something coming into here. So let's look at a different building that's also being built right now, and this one is at 1601 DeKalb. So this building is making 122 units, but this only has to be 25% affordable. So only 30 of the units have to be under 60% of MFI.
Sure.
So 90 market rate.
Exactly, 90 market rate. And this is in the same neighborhood, same kind of construction year.
So, yeah, unless something changed with that particular project, that's what they were originally required to do, but there was intense community discussion, and the developer is actually more community-minded than the average developer, and they came to an agreement with Riseboro, which, who knows if it's been changed, it's been years since we heard from them, but they did work out the numbers to be 100% affordable, taking larger subsidy and opening it up to higher income brackets. So originally what they proposed is exactly what you're saying, but then eventually after negotiations with the community board elected officials, they were able to change the numbers to meet the community's needs. So we would just have to get clarification on if that's still true today.
Can you explain what you mean by 100% affordable opening it up to higher bracket?
So basically subsidize, taking any of these, taking subsidy for any of these. So as we were saying before, there are programs that allow up to like 120, 130.
Yeah, 130.
Yes. Thank you.
Yes.
I guess to see these more holistically, we would ideally have numbers on, like, they don't always publish these, but if only 20% are affordable, then we can assume that the other 80% is going to fall in here. And so to visualize that, we could just put some dots up here. This isn't data that we got, but we know it's got to be in the and there might be like some penthouses.
Yeah, you can sort of see, like, you know, it's approximately the same amount of units, right? 150, 130, but the different kinds of people they're bringing in, what they're bringing in with that, like how that's going to affect the neighborhood too.
St. Joseph's, I think it was on Bushwick Avenue, the one that got the top, the steeple cut off with St. Joseph's. You know which one I'm talking about? On Bushwick Avenue after Myrtle going towards Flushing. The one Jamie Wiseman, they cut off the steeple.
Oh, yeah, St. Mark's.
St. Mark's.
St. Mark's. St. Mark's.
So they have a penthouse that's like $5,000, and it's also an affordable building.
Wow.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah, that was my next
And there was a
question.
church.
Is if, like for instance, in the case of this building that Riseboro would have negotiated, so if they're going to make all 150 units affordable, but it's like 150% MFI, would that make it less affordable? And if they set aside 60 units for 60% affordability, and then the rest were like market rate?
So the way that, this was years ago prior to the pandemic, but from my understanding what it was, they took the ones, like the categories, the income brackets that folks wanted to see, like the 30, the 40, the 60% AMI, and they said we need higher incomes to, you know, subsidize this. So even if we wanted to do like, you know, like we wouldn't be able to do more of the affordable housing unless, you know, we broke it down into these specific categories. So I think they went from doing like, you know, 25% and 60% AMI to like doing all of it, breaking down, like maybe there's a few at 30, maybe there's a few at 60, maybe there's a few at like 130.
Yeah, it goes back to the averaging piece that we
Right.
were talking about. Like you can have a 20 if you have a 150.
Right, right. So they try to balance it out to see if they can get more on the lower spectrum by including something on the higher spectrum that was at that point going beyond market rate. So
That was the one in the Knights development, I think, right?
this one is the one on DeKalb, the parking lot off of
Oh, okay,
White Cove.
DeKalb,
But the
White
first
Cove.
one is NYCHA.
Yeah.
That's why it's so affordable, because it's city, it's public land, well,
Yeah.
federal, but public land.
It's really federal.
Yeah, federal.
Okay, well that's all we had for today. But thanks very much.
Yeah, and hopefully all of you, now that you know the terms, right, you can negotiate it too when developers come. You can ask for the percentages, ask for what they're looking at, and, you know, try to negotiate there. You're bringing more people here, the trains are crowded. How can you negotiate that? Like, make more infrastructure or something to, you know, balance it all out.
have copies. for
Yeah,
you.
we've got copies for you. It's also available
Oh, you
online
brought
as
more
like a
goodies
PDF
besides
to
food?
share.
Oh, man. I thought we just had food. All right. You said goodies, there was food, there was good. Oh, look, everything fell. They gave the crash course.
Good to go.
Uh-oh.